We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and good Friday to each and every one of you now hearing my voice in real time. And if you are hearing my voice in post time, I certainly wish that you have had a wonderful day wherever you may be. This is Robert Phoenix, and you are now listening to the Friday FARcast. It's the 24th of May, and today's show promises to be quite exceptional. I know because I've already done an hour's worth of the show. So at least half of the show is going to be exceptional. I have no doubt that the other half will be as equally stirring, stimulating, and enlightening as the second half will be, at which time you'll be listening to James Gilliland from the eceti Institute. But my first guest of the day is Dr. Courtney Brown. And Dr. Courtney Brown is a remote viewer. And this is his bio, according to Wikipedia. He's a social scientist, believe he's a associate professor at Emory University in political science. We'll find that out when he comes on the air. We'll clarify his professional status at Emory. And according to Wikipedia, he is known for promoting the use of nonlinear mathematics in social scientific research. He's also known as a proponent of remote viewing, a form of extrasensory perception. So I think one of the things that we'll ask Dr. Brown is the interface between nonlinear mathematics and remote viewing, if there is one, and how those two dance together. From his applied mathematics background, it says here that Brown's research in applied mathematics is mostly focused on social science applications of time-dependent models. He has published 5 peer-reviewed books in numerous articles in applied mathematics. Brown is also a very visible advocate on YouTube of the use of the R programming language, both for statistical as well as nonlinear modeling applications in the social sciences. As far as remote viewing goes, his research has received notable positive reviews from other advocates of psi phenomena such as Fred Allen Wolf, William A. Tiller, and Daryl Byrne. Brown's remote viewing findings have been dismissed by some other scientists, such as Emory University Scott O. Lilienfeld. Well, we'll ask Courtney Brown about that as well. But long story short, Courtney Brown has been on the scene for quite a while. He first crossed my radar when I used to listen to him on Art Bell or on the overnight program, Coast to Coast, when Art Bell was behind the mic. And maybe we could get into that a little bit with Courtney. But really what I wanted to bring Courtney on today for is to talk about the GCE, the Global Coastal Event. And in our first few discussions and exchanges via email, he pointed me to some material video that he'd put out, excuse me, that the global coastal event had been averted and it was taking place on another timeline. So I thought that was actually a pretty interesting place to dig into and start, because there is a lot happening right now. There's a lot of earth changes, some big mofo tornadoes ripping through the center of this country. And by the way, if you haven't checked the news lately, they're expecting a massive storm on the East Coast, big hurricane season, and unfortunately, one of their main weather satellites has gone down prior to the start of what could be a significant and epic hurricane season. So let's get some insight into these conditions and more with our guest today, Dr. Courtney Brown.
Hi, Robert, can you hear me?
I can hear you great, Courtney. Thank you for being on with us today.
Oh, great. I guess to clarify some of the stuff about Emory University. At Emory, I don't do any remote viewing research.
Right.
I just do mathematics. I'm in the social science department, so I do applied mathematics there. But there is a connection between remote viewing in my mind and nonlinear mathematics, and that is that remote viewing is an ability to transfer information, perceptual information, across time and space. And if humans can do it with the technological apparatus of their own physiology, the mind, then obviously machines can do it as well, technological stuff, and advanced beings should be able to transfer information. But if you can transfer information, physicists have long known that there's no difference between information and physical things, that information is physical. Mm-hmm. And, for example, if you take information, this is an experiment that's been around for a very long time. If you take information and destroy information, you release heat. So that's been an interesting laboratory experiment for a while. And so when you're transferring information...
Really quickly, Courtney, how did they do that? How is information destroyed and heat released? This is an interesting equation here.
Well, it's been around actually for a very long time theoretically, but the idea that that information is physical was originally developed by quite a number of decades ago, and it was a tremendous amount of theoretical stuff that was poured into it. However, the experiments that were done to verify that, in fact, when you destroy information, you relieve heat, is more recent.
Right.
And basically, the experiments, you can actually read about that in Wikipedia of all things. They have things relating to that. But the issue is that when you have information, which is things that are organized, and you take that organization and you destroy it so that you have randomness, you have the lack of information. You don't just have nothing. You have something left over. You actually have heat. And that's actually a laboratory experiment that was conducted in the not too distant past, like the late 1990s. And so it's a very interesting concept that physicists have long stated that information and physical stuff is similar. So the idea of transferring information across time and space is extremely sensitive to them, because if you're saying that you can transfer information across time and space, to the physicist, that means that you can transfer physical things across time and space, because they know that there's no difference between information and physical things. And so, at least in their inherent nature. And so that means that everything that we know about physics that's taught in the universities is very limited. Mm-hmm. That means that what we have is Newtonian physics is very limited to classical mechanics. I mean, it's extremely useful. We use Newtonian physics all the time when we fly airplanes, drive cars, and everything that we do in normal life involves Newtonian physics. But when you get to vast velocities, then you're dealing with relativistic physics. Mm-hmm. But now we know that both relativistic physics and Newtonian physics are just subsets of a much larger realm around which mainstream physicists know absolutely nothing. In fact, I can say with absolute certainty that there are elements within military intelligence that are very quite frustrated with the physics community for trying to, defend their paradigms of transportation being limited by the speed of light so ferociously, when in fact, some elements within the military interact with and deal with extraterrestrials regularly that span across time and space all the time. I mean, it's really it's to the point where there are a bunch of people that just look at the physics community and say, "Damn, are they nuts?" I mean, that's like saying that you're only going to be looking at a one subset of information, and anything that violates that subset of information you will not look at because it cannot exist. Now, this is not just limited to physics. This is quite broad spectrum. In my own fields, in the social sciences, you have people who are absolutely adamant about saying we're only going to be looking at behaviors of humans because non-humans don't exist. For example, there is in any peer-reviewed journal in political science and sociology, there are no papers whatsoever even speculating about what civilizations on other planets would be like. None. And we have a universe that's filled with life, saucers that are, ships that are flying all over the place, evidence galore that we had ancient civilizations on Earth, and nobody has written a single peer-reviewed article on anything other than humans over the last, couple thousand years. And then if you look at archaeology, if you look at, for example, Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, you'll find that in archaeology it's even worse. There's evidence galore that there's been humans, thinking, working, technologically aware humans going back millions of years. And absolutely all of that's been suppressed in mainstream archaeology. The artifacts are ignored, ridiculed, whatever. But, Michael Cremo went through a great deal of effort to detail how ridiculous all of this is and how much archaeology is actually not reported and actively repressed. Now, this does not mean that the repressors are evil. No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that there's something in the human's nerve and the human psychology that is extremely frightened of these subjects. And there's just a tremendous amount of limitation. So one of the things that you have is ridicule. Ridicule is one of the primary means of knocking these types of ideas that challenge the way of thinking out so much. But, that's what's normal. And then, of course, people who are assigned the role of keeping these things apart, those like military people who don't want remote viewing, for example, to be discussed in large numbers, then, or in sort of in serious places, in serious realms, those people are very happy with how easy it is to sort of say anything. The guy, for example, who invented the swamp gas idea. Remember, the idea who said that swamp gas is a flying saucer of swamp gas. Well. He actually laughs at that now. I mean, he was actually in Washington just a little bit ago, and he was giving a testimony, and basically saying that people will believe absolutely anything. It's not hard at all because people really don't want to know this information. They don't want to hear it, and so you tell them absolutely anything. So they were coming up with any ideas whatsoever, like a ship that was flying at incredible speeds. They called swamp gas. And that was one where it actually was a little bit hard for people to accept, so they didn't use that one again. But the inventor of the swamp gas idea has openly confessed that that they were just saying anything, and that was an idea that came to mind. And they said, well, they'll believe anything, so let's call it swamp gas. And now he's confessed up that that actually happened. By the way, that stuff about information, that information is physical. That information, that actually was originally developed by Norbert Wiener. That's Schiener, and Claude Shannon, Shannon. And that was around 1948.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been around for a long while. However, the experiments that have gone on are more recent than that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really up on the details of the experiments, but I do know what they found, that when they did destroy information, there is detectable heat, which meant that the information, equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. The speed of light is a constant, so the square of it is a constant. So energy equals a mass times the scaling factor. So energy and mass are identical. So
Mm-hmm.
if they get energy as a result of the release of information, they got it from mass. So there is no difference between it.
Was this something that was theoretical that they just put up on the board as a formula, or did they? Because I'm interested in how they actually organized the information. Was it paper? Was it recorded? I mean, how
originally, with Norman Weiner and Claude Shannon, they did it as sort of thought experiment.
Right.
But how they actually did it in a laboratory was a highly controlled physics experiment, mm-hmm. where you had a completely sealed environment that was completely sealed from anything surrounding, so you could have no contamination from the outside entering into it. And then they had information, and they organized that information in some way. So most people think of just information as stuff that they know, but that's not what information is. Information is any organization of anything, the organization of stuff. So, for example, if you put chess pieces out on a chessboard, they're organized in a certain pattern. I mean, a different pattern won't work. Well, that's information. So if you destroy information and get randomness, you don't get just the rearranging of information and it's neutral. You get heat. Mm-hmm. So that's what's so interesting. And if you actually look up in Wikipedia Norbert Weiner and Claude Shannon, who independently sort of came up with these ideas, you'll eventually find people talking about the actual laboratory experiment. I'm not real up on the details of it, but I know that I do know that they did it with a sealed environment, and it was very highly technological. Mm-hmm. It was done in a mainstream laboratory, and it's been replicated, so it's not in dispute.
Right.
But that is why physicists are so concerned about the idea that information with remote viewing is being transferred across time and space. That means that all of their ideas of Newtonian and relativistic physics are very incomplete. Now, it's not saying they're wrong, meaning they work within a subset of accepted reality. But as soon as you accept that remote viewing is real, then you realize that whole subset of accepted reality. See, physicists think of as the relativistic and classical mechanics as being the entire beginning and end of the explanation of everything.
Right.
And now they're realizing that they're just playing in a sandbox, or that's what they will have to face, that they're just playing in a sandbox, and in fact the physical reality is much, much wider than that, much bigger than that, and that they're not even dealing with the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's real and what's not real. So that's how the ships actually get to us. They have to come up with completely new physics, and I've actually given talks at scientific venues, at university settings, about the physics that would have to be accepted within contemporary science in order to accept the reality of remote viewing. Meaning there is, all the basic theoretical stuff is there, it's already existing, and I've actually pointed it out and organized it. And a good way to actually get into that and sort of see it is with a YouTube video that I did of a presentation I was doing while I was out. I was out at the University of Colorado Boulder last year, and in Boulder I gave a talk on this subject, and that is available on our homepage at Farsight Institute's homepage, www.farsight.org, FARSIGHT.org. One thing I would really like to encourage all of your listeners to do is we are going to be having some really important announcements soon. And one of the things I would like everyone to do before they do anything else, like before to eat, before to sleep, before anything, is sign up for our newsletter. We issue very few newsletters, like sometimes once every couple months. I mean, very few announcements. Mm-hmm. But when we do, it's always like really important. So we're about to issue a few of them. And if you just go to our homepage and look at the bottom of the nav bar, you'll see a blue thing saying, subscribe to our free newsletter. Just put your email and name in there, and you'll be there, and you'll get it. So we don't actually go out and try to tell people, like, to wave a flag and try to get attention and tell people what we found. So if they haven't heard about it from something like our newsletter or seen it on our website, they just don't know about it. And I've seen people go on for months thinking we may have been saying one thing, and then they've missed something that was said months earlier. So some very important announcements are coming up in a couple weeks, and so that free newsletter is something they should do. Now the thing is, with you had mentioned about this global coastal event that Cliff High talks about. We don't have information, and never did, on a global coastal event, although Cliff has interpreted our results from our climate project in terms of supporting the idea of a global coastal event. And so, that's where the word, we don't use the word global coastal event. But we did have a remote viewing study between, looking at climate change between 2008 and 2013, where we did find a huge amount of difference and a lot of disaster stuff happening in 2013. And the deadline, or the ending date for that, is June 1st, 2013. And one of the results that we seemed to find in that was what appeared to be meteor strikes hitting the Earth, causing large displacement waves or tsunamis. Now, remember that this was not a prediction. We don't make predictions. What this was a experiment. An experiment is we had data, and then we have to wait to see till June 1st, 2013 to see if the data are correct. So that's what we're doing. We're in the middle of an experiment. So in February of this year, we had two large meteor/asteroid events. We had the passage of a very near-miss asteroid, DA14, and we had a big explosion of a huge meteor that blew up over Russia. And so that was in the middle of February. So I had to come up with an update on the climate project, basically to calm people down, because we didn't want people to get excited and start, jumping off cliffs and stuff like that. Because it was obvious that the meteor data that we had was actually coming out looking like it was correct. So I had to give an update to sort of say, according to mainstream science, the chance of that happening, to two large meteor/asteroids, one a near miss and one actually happening at the same time within 24 hours, is over 100 million to 1. So the chance of further meteor strikes, according to mainstream science, is slim to none. So that was probably the cause of the meteor impact data that we seem to have in our Farsight stuff, so that nothing further should happen if mainstream science view of the rarity of that type of a thing is correct. So that's where that. So I put out that update in February. So and basically the idea is that the whole 2013 experiment that we're doing is an experiment involving multiple timelines. We've been heavily involved in research dealing with multiple realities, multiple timelines, and that actually we sometimes known as multiple universes. And actually just last week, a huge group of mainstream physicists announced that they have found patterns in the radiation background of the universe that suggest that there are, in fact, billions, perhaps an infinity of other universes. I mean, and so, that it's a very difficult idea for most people to wrap their head around, and people laughed and we talked about it. But now finally mainstream physicists are coming to the same conclusion. And so, and that was reported in in various mainstream venues. So this whole idea of there being multiple realities is very real. Now, if there are multiple realities, then it would be very difficult to perceive which reality we're going to run into in the future. But one of the indications are that we were correct, that there is a sort of a general probabilistic smear that involves meteor impacts with Earth and the neighboring vicinity, and this time period is that in fact meteor impacts and meteor events have been really high ever since late December. Actually, ever since December 2012, and they seem to be building. So there's a lot of meteor events that are going on. A meteor impacted La Paz, Mexico, just a little while ago.
That's right.
And also, you have to understand, how do you actually create an alternate timeline? You create it by taking information from the future, say with remote viewing, bring it to the current time, and then people can do things that change that future. That's how you create another timeline.
That's right.
And so one of the things we have to be considering, and this would be laughed at by many mainstream scientists, but they're ridiculous in the first place, because I'm purposely trying to irritate them because they are so resistant to these ideas, and I am a mainstream scientist, so I'm saying my own colleagues are very resistant to these ideas, and it's stupid for this to continue forever. And so the basic idea is that we have to be open to the possibility that the DA-14 asteroid and the meteor that did impact Russia in February may have been influenced and thus didn't hit us. And the reason I sort of suggest this is that there are realms within the U.S. military, and I presume the Russian military, where active communication and interaction with some extraterrestrials does take place, sharing of technology and so on. And this will eventually all come out, but it won't come out until somebody proposes, and it's widely accepted that there'll be an amnesty for the cover-up that's been going on for decades. So, I mean, that's really what's holding it up. I mean, once the cat comes out of the bag, people are going to be screaming for blood, and there has to be an amnesty, a general amnesty for everybody, or it's just not going to move forward. And so the basic idea is that there may have been something that influenced those meteors, asteroids, at that time in mid-February that prevented them from causing great devastation. The reason I can say this is because if you were the United States government, for example, and you got information from a Farsight project that said, hey, there's major impacts coming, what would you do? Would you say, oh my gosh, that's terrible? No, what you do is say you check it out with the extraterrestrials that you are working with, that you do have contact with, and say, well, look, nudge it for us, will you? I mean, if DA-14 was going to impact Earth, they would make a request, say, we want this nudged. And there are some photographic evidence from astronomy where it does appear that there's some light movement when DA-14 was sort of far away. So then it'd be no big deal at all for an extraterrestrial ship to nudge it when it was far away and have it miss by a hair's width, as it did, rather than impact. And the other reason I can suggest this is because that when the asteroid that did impact Russia hit, while it was overhead, they had a lot of people shooting, pointing their video cameras at it. And one of the interesting videos that came out, it's been widely reported on YouTube, and it's still available on YouTube, is that with one really nice video that was gotten, it was very clear that something came from behind the asteroid while it was the meteor while it was passing through the atmosphere, and impacted it from behind, meaning it was going faster. It hit it from behind and fragmented it, blew it up.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the meteor would have impacted the ground, all of it, in one lump, and it would have created the equivalent of a huge atomic bomb. I mean, it would have been hugely devastating for a flight by the Russian.
Part 2.
What's that?
It would have been Tunguska Part 2. The
Yeah.
Tunguska episode.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. And so that's what they're really, that's what is to me is saying, well, look, for somebody to have blown up that meteor, fragmented it before it hit the ground, they had to be ready for it. It wouldn't have been something that it just sort of sprung upon them, and it was either anti-ballistic missile system space-based that the Russians used, or an anti-ballistic missile system space-based that the U.S. used, or it was an ET craft. And
so somebody knew, and they knew the projected flight path, which meant that they either had to have a very tight, scalable model, or they had to have some idea about the future.
Yeah, they had to be waiting for it. I mean, they had to be knowing that there were going to be impacts, and they had to have some means of impacting that meteor as soon as it showed up. So it either had to be an extraterrestrial craft that did it, which they could do, or it had to be a U.S. or Russian weapon that blew it up. But that was, I mean, it was so clear on the video evidence. The video is, I mean, it's as clear as could be.
It is clear.
And now the only natural explanation you could say for that is that there might have been another meteor coming from a different direction, faster than that one, and it just happened like two billiard balls hitting on a billiard table. It just happened to hit it at that particular moment. But now look, if it's 100 million to 1 odds that two meteor asteroid type things could even come close to the Earth at any one 24-hour period, what's the probability that two meteors could hit one another in the Earth's atmosphere immediately before impacting the Earth? It's as close to zero as you can possibly imagine. So, you know, it had to have been somebody who did it. Mm-hmm. Now the question is only who did it. So, but you see, that is why you have to consider the idea of multiple timelines. So the remote viewing data that we have that suggests that there were meteor impacts at this time, those data were collected back in 2008, way before anyone had any idea that there might be a surge of meteor activity at this point in time. So we do have, and we are still going through, sort of a flurry of meteor activity. And it's very unusual. The amount of meteor activity that we're having now is much higher than is normal for, like, if you go back a few years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there was a big impact of a visible meteor on the moon just a few days back.
Huge.
So, yeah, it was huge. I mean, you could see it with your naked eye. So there are big meteors passing through this area now. And so the real question was, were the remote viewing data incorrect? Well, if you understand the reality of multiple timelines, multiple realities, actually they were dead on. There has to have been other realities in which these things did happen, where the big impacts did occur. So some people, many people, think of the alternate reality explanation as being a cop-out. But that's a stupid idea. But nonetheless, it's okay for people to think that if that's what they want. They can come up with any thought that they want to avoid thinking of these things. They can think that UFOs are swamp gas if they want. I mean, it's their choice. It's their life they're living. But the reality is we had a very highly controlled experiment involving 113 remote viewing sessions done by the world's best remote viewers on the planet. And the disaster content piled up in 2013, and there was essentially no disaster content in the randomized remote viewing sessions that were collected for 2008 targets. So if it was a result of a colossal failure, then you would have seen the disaster content randomly scattered across 2008 sessions and 2013 sessions, but it wasn't. It was all piled up on 2013. So, you know, it wasn't a failure. The data did pile up in that way. And in fact, we do have a situation in which there's a lot of meteor stuff going on. So that really does support the idea of multiple timelines.
Mm-hmm. Courtney, I wanted to ask you about the impact of consciousness and perception on these events. It's something that I've asked a few people, and I've actually speculated myself. that by being aware of probability, whether it comes from you or from Cliff High or other folks that talk about events that have the potential to occur, by being aware of these potential realities at such a large level, we're sort of stepping into Heisenberg and maybe to some extent William Tiller's realms, where we're actually influencing the potential outcome of these events merely by our perception and our curiosity and our communication. What in your experience and perhaps even your work either corroborates this or dismisses this outright as just being noise?
Say the question again. Let me get a little better focus. I want to make sure I understand exactly what you're saying.
Influence as a collective energy, as a collective thought form, how much do we influence the potential of reality or reality potential simply by being aware of it? So if Cliff High says to enough people that there's going to be a global coastal event at the end of May, beginning of June, and all of a sudden 7 million people are thinking about the potential of a global coastal event, or if Cliff High does the same thing about the economy, which he's done in the past, and the economy is supposed to collapse, but it doesn't, is our paying attention to those events altering those events? That's the question.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know really the answer to it, but we do tend to get what we think about. You know, how many times have, this is sort of the law of attraction type of issue. How many times have you had a conversation with someone and they were talking about, how their life is sort of a mess, and they were talking about how it would be great to have X, Y, and Z happen that would solve their problems, and they'd be in, rosy heaven. And you sort of look at them, you don't mention anything, but in your mind you only say, you look at them and you say, they don't understand. Nothing would change. They're not ready for that reality. Their mind is stuck in all their troubles, and if they had some great thing happen to them, they'd blow it up in a second, and it'd be gone within a blink of an eye. So, we've all had those types of experiences where we've talked to people who talked about, how much better they would feel if the reality changed. But then if you look at them, you say, no, their reality isn't going to change because that's just not the way they're thinking. They couldn't handle a different reality. Well, that's basically the law of attraction at work. What you're intuitively feeling is that those people are vibrating in a way that is compatible with their reality, and they don't understand that they have to change their way of thinking in order to be compatible with a different reality before that reality will manifest. So what you're asking is sort of, if we raise the idea of the global coastal event, will we, which I haven't raised, I use those words, but Cliff does, and I understand how he finds a parallel with those words and some of our data. So does that make the global coastal event more likely? Well, in reality, you could sort of say
or less likely, perhaps.
You go. It definitely involves it. It changes the probabilities.
Right.
That means that there is nothing fixed about a particular future. So, what in the remote viewing realm of looking at things is that when you talk about these things in the future, you can change the actions in the current to prevent them or to change their probabilities. So if in fact we have a global coastal event or major impacts or whatever, then if the military takes these things seriously, they can do things to prevent those things from occurring. Now, casual people or mainstream people or whoever will look at the non-appearance of those events and say that's proof that the remote viewing didn't work. But that's really just not what happened. So if you look at the issue sort of broadly, you really do see that it's extremely complicated. And part of the complications is that there are people that do take this thing very seriously and act on that information, and changes the nature of the reality. And so it's very hard without getting them to come forward and fess up, it's very hard to convince everybody else that the remote viewing predictions or descriptions of the future were in fact correct. So the other thing is that those people who like to look at future predictions and the accuracy or inaccuracy thereof as evidence of the non-working of remote viewing are really so bending the tail of truth to the point of non-recognition, because what they're not recognizing is that remote viewing, the past and the present, has long been demonstrated to work extremely well under totally verified scientific conditions with all randomized controls. So the remote viewing literature is very extensive on that. So remote viewing past and present doesn't have the problems that we have with remote viewing the future. So the real question is not, does remote viewing work? The question is, how do you use it to remote view the future in an effective way, especially in a situation where there is a multiple timeline situation? Now, this means that we have multiple timelines in the past and the present as well. It just means that it's easier for us to navigate with perceptual information particular timelines in the past, so that we sort of think that there was only one past, but the reality is there's many pasts. For example, there can be a past, and there was a past, in which all of the major worlds, the wars of World War II, all of the major wars of the 20th century did not happen. And there's another past in which World War II ended with nuclear destruction. So, you can get past going all different ways, but when we remote view the past, we don't get those unless you try to specifically find them. You normally get whatever you want. If you want to get the sinking of the Titanic, you get the sinking of the Titanic. So, and the reason is that when we create the targets for people to remote view, with regard to the past and present stuff, we know exactly the spot, the timeline that we want. And it's because we now understand the physical mechanism by which the focus of perception with remote viewing is obtained, it's a natural phenomenon for us to automatically get the timeline correct, remote viewing in the past and the present. But when you are remote viewing the future, you don't know what timeline you want because you don't know what's out there. And because you don't have sort of a historical memory of going into the future. And so what happens is you're really sort of vulnerable to getting anything that's out there, all of which are equally real and exist in real time. But you don't have such an easy time to control which one you get. So one of the things that we did was we conducted an experiment at the Farsight Institute called the Multiple Universes Experiment, where we said, if this is true, we should be able to predict the future or describe the future if we have the person picking the target located in the future, meaning the sessions were done first, and then a month later, some set of events could occur, or some event would occur in the world that would be newsworthy, and then a month after that, a tasker, or the person who picked the target, would pick the event for the target out of anything that happened in the world during that middle month. So if you have the remote viewing sessions done in January, and then February is the month designed where something will happen in the world, and then March, the person in March who's assigned to do this will look at everything that happened in February and pick the target for the sessions that were already done in January. And we did this with total scientific controls where all the sessions were encrypted in January, put up on the web, tens of thousands of people downloaded them. And we did this repeatedly for a year, and absolutely 100% of the time we were able to describe the future event that happened a month after the remote viewing sessions were done, as long as that event was in the past of the tasker, the person who picked the target, so that the targets didn't even exist at the time that we were doing the sessions. And we had the best military-grade remote viewers on the planet do this, and they did it for a year. And this was published in a leading peer-reviewed journal, the Journal of Scientific Exploration. The data and the experimental results for that is very clear, very unambiguous. So that was a specific experiment designed to test for the realities of multiple universes. If there are multiple realities, then that experimental design should have eliminated the ambiguity and the inaccuracy of describing the future. And in fact, it did. So, this is the realm that we're sort of entering. Again, for those people who've joined, Robert, I'd really like to encourage everybody to sign up for our newsletter at farsight.org. At the bottom of the nav link, signing up for the newsletter. It's free, and it's the only way we have to communicate our latest findings, and we're about to come up with 2 major announcements in June. So if people can remember to sign up for the newsletter, we very rarely send out a newsletter. Like sometimes 2 months will go by and nothing happens. So, but when we do send something out and something is imminent, we want people to sign up so that we can make that announcement.
So, Courtney, we only have about 10 minutes left, a little bit more than that. There are a couple things I wanted to ask you about and kind of get on the front burner. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, where are we currently with the state of remote viewing as a tool? How prevalent is it in private industry or corporations using it? If so, to what end are they engaging in remote viewing?
Well, the largest venue for scientific research and remote viewing is the Farsight Institute. We're the largest venue. We have a huge website. We have an international network of remote viewers that we work with. And we work with multi-methodologies, also the CRV, Controlled Remote Viewing, as well as HRVG, Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, as well as people working in some other methods, scientific remote viewing and so on. But the use of remote viewing is really, in terms of real active use, is really done on our website, at the Institute, and in the U.S. military. It's very rarely done by corporations. There are some corporate uses of it, but the corporations deal with the same problems that everybody else deals with, the giggle factor. So really, when you have people using it, and you also have very few trained remote viewers. Remote viewing is not easy to do well. I mean, I work with people who do it well. It's not easy to do well. It takes an enormous amount of commitment. There's really only a few world-class remote viewers that can do stuff that are practical, that are useful on a practical level. And we've actually started some training recently. We do our training for free. And we've actually started some training with people who have been studying various forms of remote viewing to upgrade their capabilities to be able to do graphics, a lot of picture stuff, a lot of visual stuff. And, we hope to also start training. We hope to also start training internationally more. There are some good remote viewers that are training people in other places, Europe and so on, but the big places that really we're looking forward to is Africa, believe it or not, and Asia. Mm-hmm. And for a really good reason. Asians don't have as much of a prejudice. Some places are very conservative, but they don't often have as much of a prejudice with as much repression of sort of the background for remote viewing and side processes. And in Africa, you have really well-educated populace and an economy that's garbage. And so really what you have is a perfect time for us to outsource remote viewing to really well-educated people who need the income and who would be able to work for very little money. And so Africa is really a great place for us to extend remote viewing stuff. As soon as you start talking about doing remote viewing seriously, you have to talk about people doing it almost full-time. And if you're doing it almost full-time in the West, you're competing against your own job, and you have to pay the bills, and people just don't have that time to do that. But in Africa, you can actually pay people to do the remote viewing and pay them almost, very little on Western terms, and to them it's a huge salary. And they can do it almost full-time because there aren't many other jobs to compete for their time. So you can get really well-educated people speaking the King's English, and they're really good. Also, we can also train people more selectively in Africa. We can actually go to the artist community, for example, who are bone broke and need any type of income whatsoever. And being artists, they're really great with drawing things in the first place. So, They'd be perfect for that type of thing. So that's the type of expansion that we're planning on, that we're thinking of, that hasn't actually come about. But you'll see that start to happen this year.
The other question I wanted to ask you is, and I think it was the past year, we lost a giant in the remote viewing community in the psychic world, in Ingo Swan. Did you know Ingo at all?
Well, I've communicated with him via post, via letters, and I've never physically met him, so I was not one of the people who met him. But there's a double-edged sword to Ingo. The Ingo himself was great. He was a real pioneer. He was wonderful. He was one of the people who figured out. He's an artist, and he figured out what his mind was doing when he was doing these psychic practices. And he eventually got the military to pay for essentially what was art classes for them to start expanding their remote viewing stuff that they did. And that sort of started the whole ball of wax. So all that's a plus, and all that's great. As far as Ingo is concerned, limiting it just to discussion of Ingo, he was a great, 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 great pioneer. The bad side is, as a double-edged sword, is that there is a huge level of worship that goes on in the active remote viewing community now towards the pioneering past, which has stifled research and advancement into the present like you've never believed it. So there's nothing wrong with Ingo and any of the other greats. The issue is that, are we still worshiping Thomas Edison? My God, just let it go. I mean, there are other ways to create a light bulb. And so, within the remote viewing community, there's a tremendous amount of reverence, and it's almost to the point of stopping people from doing anything new.
Right.
You can almost think of it in a biblical sense. If Jesus came to the world to spread the message that God is a happy God and love is the energy that drives the universe, look where that got us. With all this reverence and everything, we now have the Crusades. We have a Vatican that tells people to confess their sins. And I mean, the last message that you can get out of the Vatican is that God is a happy God. What you're getting out of it, and I talk as a Catholic, but what you're getting out of it is that Hail Marys, full of grace, be with us at our death, forgive us our sins. I mean, it's as morose as you can possibly get. And so the point is, and it's all this with this reverence, and you can't really approach Jesus, the concept of Jesus as a human being, as a person, as a thing. It's always this elevated thing that's God, that's you have to worship, that's always distant from you. And what has that done? It has really stopped. The whole idea of the canon, the whole idea of doctrine, of belief, is that things are fixed. And that means people aren't thinking. And that means they're not using God's greatest gift, which is the intellect and curiosity and stuff like that. Well, that is what we have in the remote viewing community in large parts, and Ingo has turned into the remote viewing version of Jesus. Not that Ingo did it. I mean, Ingo didn't do anything except be a genius. That's all he did. But humans have this natural tendency to worship the pioneers to the point of not changing, not growing. And they don't realize that the very thing that made Ingo so great is that he did things differently. He changed things. And so the best honor you can give to Ingo is to do things differently, meaning don't follow him blindly. Stay, do your normal stuff. So, no, I did not know Ingo, but I have a lot of good feelings about his contribution.
Mm-hmm.
I wish people would act a lot more like him and stop worshiping him.
Right.
Anyway, that's my 2 cents on Ingo Swan.
Okay. Real quick, we've covered a fair amount of ground today. Is there any information within the next that you could share with people succinctly within about 3 or 4 minutes that they actually need to know about right now? You've actually spent some time remote viewing and want to share with us?
Are you talking about global coastal event type stuff?
Yeah, global coastal event or anything related.
No, we had an update in February, and we're still waiting for the 1st of June to happen in order for us to close our sessions. So we don't really know what's going to happen between now and the 1st of June, but I'm assuming the mainstream science view that meteor impacts are going to be extremely rare, that the things that happened in February was sort of it. I'm assuming that that's correct. And if that doesn't turn out to be correct and something else happens, well, that'll be interesting too. And whatever the results are, we'll compare with our actual data. However, Robert, we do have 2 major announcements that are coming up in June. So if people sign up for our free newsletter, they will get them. And one of them has to do with an ancient civilization that we are going to be talking about in great depth, and I'll come on your radio show and talk about it again if you'd like. We like to call it Atlantis, but there actually was a advanced technological civilization made up of us, not anybody else, us, that destroyed itself, and we have solid proof of it, geological proof, archaeological proof of it, evidence of it, really solid stuff, and the whole kit and caboodle comes out. And it wasn't going to come out this week. That was why I wanted to have the interview today. But we had some last-minute editing issues on the DVD that sort of puts the whole piece out. So it's going to be another couple of weeks before that comes out. Also, I'm going to have an update on the climate project after June 1st. But those things will be available, announced on the newsletter. So if people sign up for the free newsletter, they will get it. And if they don't sign up for it, we're not going to wave any flags in front of their face. They just won't know about it. So if that newsletter is something that everybody should do. In fact, I run into an awful lot of radio hosts that, not you, Robert, but others that don't even know our announcements that are not on our newsletter. And they contact me saying something that, what we might have talked about 2 years ago. And I'm saying, like, where are you, in the flood? There's a lot's changed since then. So even radio hosts should be signing up for our newsletter because that's where we make our announcements. Remember, we're a nonprofit, and we don't go out and try to get people's attention. And so what we do is we do our studies, and then we announce on our newsletter what we've come up with. But I'm telling you, 2 major things are coming in June. Okay.
Well, great. Well, I really enjoyed having you on the show, Courtney, and I feel like we're just scratching the surface here. And we'd love to have you back. We'd love to have you back on, especially maybe sometime after these announcements. So let's see if we can line that up, okay?
Yeah, sometime after mid-June would be great.
All right, sounds like a deal. That's Courtney Brown. He is the director of the Farsight Institute. You can go to, it's farsight.org. Is that the address, Courtney?
Yeah, we're nonprofit, so it's .org. www.farsight, Farsight, like seeing far, .org, O-R-G.
Okay, so there you go, farsight.org. He's also the author of a very fine book called Cosmic Voyage, and look forward to having him back on the show. Thanks again, Courtney.
Take care. God bless, and it's been great, Robert.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye now.
So that's Courtney Brown, and giving us a bit of an update on the GCE, as people have been calling it. What I want to do now is I think I want to get into James Gilliland and play the interview that I did with him a few days ago, which was on Tuesday. It's a very interesting interview. And I'm not going to give much of a lead-in other than we do talk about Earth changes in great detail. And I'm really happy with what came out of the interview, sort of at a macro level. There's actually some pretty good news in here, as well as, of course, the run-of-the-mill darkness that we all seem to be trudging through. But before I play this interview, I just have to share a story with you today. It was kind of an amazing event. In a minor way, a minor amazing event. I was at the local grocery store, and they have a wheel that spins. It's like a game show wheel, and you pull a lever, and it's got number values on it, and spins around and around and around. And I'm not talking around like a roulette wheel, but like a wheel, like a tire, right, spinning towards you. And there's 50, 1, 5, 20, instant win. And they use this for kids that come into the store. And they give these kids what's called buddy bucks at the checkout stand. And so they hand the kid a buddy buck, and the kid puts the buddy buck in the machine. It's free. They pull the lever, the wheel turns, and they get a value amount. They get a little ticket that spits out the value amount. I watched this little girl spin this wheel. I say little, maybe about 6. She spun the wheel. And I'm watching her. She just stood there intently, watching the wheel spin, and it will not stop spinning until you hit the big red button, and then it slows it down, and it goes click, 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 and then it hits the value amount with a little arrow crossing the value amount. And I'm sitting there watching. I'm thinking to myself, she's letting that wheel spin for a very long time. Well, it turns out that when she hit that button, she finally hit that button, after a good 10 to 15 seconds of the wheel spinning, the wheel spun and it hit instant win. It was almost as if she had the innate knowledge or the innate understanding as to when to hit that button. Anyway, I was fixated on that wheel because I'm thinking, while it's really spinning, I'm thinking she knows exactly what she's doing. She knows exactly what she's doing. She knows exactly when to hit that button. You can't teach that. And I think that that's an example for all of us. We know exactly what we need to hit that button, whatever that button is. All right, let's get into Mr. James Gilliland, and let's play this interview post haste. This is for me and him talking together on the phone from Tuesday. Director of eceti. It's my great pleasure to have on the show today James Gilliland, who is the founder and director of eceti Ranch, eceti, standing for Enlightened Contact with Extraterrestrial Intelligence. James, I wanted to interview you for a while. Thank you for taking time out to be with us today, and welcome to the Friday FARcast.
Oh, thanks for having me on the show.
So we are living in some very interesting times. Things are really cooking up. We've just had this major disaster take place throughout the Midwest with these enormous tornadoes, 200 miles per hour, tornadoes normally hitting 100 miles per hour. This is from a resident of Oklahoma that I know. So this is twice the speed of normal tornadoes and 3 to 4 times the size of normal tornadoes. And the amount of tornadoes out there being far more in number than our normal. What's your take on what's happening? I know this doesn't have a lot to do with eceti and the ranch, but something's going on the planet right now in a very big way, whether it's artificial, man-made via HAARP, or whether we're dealing with some real serious weather changes here and earth changes. What's your take on what's going on right now?
You know, actually, it does have a lot to do with eceti because we've been getting information about this and what's coming. You know, the earth changes, and that's one of my major focuses, as well as the awakening and healing of humanity, the earth, and the process. So there's multi-level things going on. One, it has to do with the alignment with galactic plane and the energies that are incoming. We're getting bombarded with gamma ray bursts and cosmic rays, and up to 500 times greater than we were before. And magnetic disturbances. There's alignment with Sirius and Alcyon, which is part of that, and the sun is also reacting to that. So right before this tornado, we had a series of at least 4 X-class flares went off. Some with glancing blows, and a couple, I think, M-class flares went off, and some were actually hitting the earth. So every time that happens, you'll have an increase in severe weather, an increase in earthquake and volcanic activity, and the earth is expanding. She's expanding, she's growing, and getting ready to give birth to a whole new reality, a whole new world. So basically, that's the process we're undergoing, and it goes right down to the atom itself. I mean, our DNA is being altered. Everything is in flux. It's in change right now. And that's just one of the byproducts is you're going to see nature, becoming very reactive, very explosive. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many volcanoes going on. Last time I looked, there were 7, and I think 2 or 3 more popped off. So, it's definitely underway, and it's not going to happen all at once. It's going to be a series of events as the Earth adjusts to these new energies.
Mm-hmm. Cliff High has been talking about this event, the upcoming Global Coastal Event, GCE. Any news from your world about the reality of this actually taking place sometime before the end of May, beginning of June?
Well, what they've told me is from between March and July, there were going to be phenomenal changes happening on every level, social, economic, and physical. So we're going to go through a whole gamut of challenges, with these events. And to me, it's kind of a no-brainer because you've got, a volcano going off the coast of Oregon and California right there. That one keeps having quakes and becoming active. You've got La Palma acting up. That's definitely a tsunami event once that totally, lets go. And there's, over in Hawaii, there's a huge shelf there that wants to kick off and slide. So there's a lot of things that are in precarious positions, you might say, that it's not going to take much to get them to move. And the kicker is that what I've seen is a lot of it depends on us and divine intervention as to how these things transpire. And people say, the ETs or, the ultra-dimensionals or whatever are going to come in and they're going to save us and take care of everything so we can continue business as usual. It just doesn't work that way. It's earned. Mm-hmm. It's like, just like everything, trust is earned, help is earned. It's earned by us rising to the occasion and operating along with universal law and asking for help and forgiveness to clear up the karmic consequences of a lot of things that have been done in the past. So, America's got a lot of karma, considering what we've done to other countries and allowing our corporate institutions and the military industry and things like that to run the show. And so, until we wake up and take back our power and become sovereign and get into alignment with universal law or universal principles, these things are going to unfold. But once we do as a nation and we do, come back into alignment, then there can be a lot more divine intervention and forgiveness.
Well, the political awakening and the spiritual awakening seem to be hand in glove right now because the political piece seems to be the kind of the last sort of dense bastion or the last bastion of density between us and fully awakening into our spiritual self-governance. How do you see that unfolding?
Well, there's two levels above that we have to look at, and the political arena is basically corporate sponsored. We have a corporate dictatorial democracy. Basically, we don't really have a republic. That we have it on paper, but it's not being used, as our constitution. But the problem with that is that you have the banksters who are actually running everything in the corporations, and they cover the politicians. And then you have the Illuminati above that. And above that are even some more sinister forces. People used to call them the archons or the jinn or regenerate, gray and reptilian factions that are actually running the show. And unfortunately, that's why our economics are in the condition they're in. That's why our society is in the condition it's in. And that's why our environment is just being trashed, because these beings care nothing for humanity and the earth, and it's filtered down. That consciousness is filtered down through their puppets, you might say. And it sounds like a real walk on the wild side, but I've experienced this as well as many others firsthand, where this is going. But the good news is that grid, that old network, they call it the Archon network, is being taken down. It's being torn down by some much higher forces, some ultra-dimensionals and angelic masters and things like that, are working very hard right now on our behalf, as well as the people here on Earth. The light workers here on Earth are also working to tear down this old grid and usher in a new grid, a more fourth and fifth dimensional grid that is going to, end this pain and suffering cycle and the control and enslavement program that we're now under.
Right. Here's a question for you. is the universe or God neutral, or does it have an investment in how this thing shakes out here?
That's a really good question, because if you use the word God, Elohim, the word that they use is plural. It's gods, and there are gods, and there are exquisite gods that are very loving and joyous and empowering and service oriented and just love us, like the sun. They just send out love and joy and bliss and radiate just like the sun. And they do love us, and they want to see us evolve and go forward in our own spiritual awakening and evolution. And they're very much for this. And there's other beings below them, some of the very spiritually and technologically advanced, races that I don't like calling them ETs. I call them the greater family of man. Many of them didn't have to start over as primitives due to the cataclysms here on Earth. And, there's fifth, sixth, and seventh dimensional beings out there that are really rooting for us, to get through this quantum shift, this leap in consciousness and evolution. And then above that, you have kind of the void, or what I would call the absolute. Everybody has different names for it. And it doesn't have an ego. It doesn't judge. It can't judge. It's beyond that. And I love its favorite words are "as you wish." It's like, if we go, life sucks, and people are mean, and I'm a victim, and all this stuff, it just says "as you wish." And if we say, hey, life is good, I'm going to focus on love and joy and bliss and abundance and create that in my life, the same thing happens. It says "as you wish," but we're creating according to our consciousness and what we hold in our fields. And many of us aren't even aware of what's in our fields, because we have past life trauma, birth trauma, childhood trauma,
right,
and abuse and things like that. And the programming from the network, from the Archon network, which controls the media and everything else. So we're creating according to that, and not creating from the core of our essence or the core of our being, which is the major problem, is that people have been so dumbed down and controlled and manipulated throughout time that they're not aligned with soul and spirit. They're still running on the ego, and that ego is usually pretty wounded.
Well, we seem to be in an era of deep trauma, and a lot of the events that we experience in the world, whether they're Sandy Hook or 9/11 or perhaps even the rash of tornadoes in the Midwest, they're traumatic events. And generally, as I've seen it, there's a layer of programming which will then be inserted after the traumatic event begins to take place, or takes place. What is, in your estimation, the positive aspect of these traumatic events? Meaning, from a social or collective level, does the social trauma trigger our own personal trauma, and can we learn something from it and grow through these traumas?
Exactly. And so, these traumas aren't affecting me. They're not they're not in my world. And I live, on a vortex, a beautiful ranch, and we spend our day, basically in service, helping others and gardening and doing meditation and clearing and just holding the energy and the focus here. So it's a whole different reality. But these things do affect the collective consciousness. And when they're broadcasted over all the news and radios and everything else redundantly with the images and everything, it does hold people down in fear and dependency, and everybody's looking for some external source to fix it. And unfortunately, the external sources that are there to fix it are actually exacerbating it and making things worse. So it's a major external program to trap people in their ego and trap them in fear and insecurity and things of that nature, and keep them focused on the external, some external boogeyman or event coming to get them. And if people would take the time to go internal and make their own personal connection with, God, Creator, Spirit, whatever you want to call it, and come from that position, they would see, behind all these veils and would see this doesn't affect them. And we're all eternal beings. I've died a couple times and come back, and I know this is not just it. So I'm not really that worried about death, although I want to preserve my body as long as I can. I mean, that's nature. But at the same time, I'm not, you know, I don't focus every minute on you know, what's going to get me next. I was meditating once, and you know, I have conscious contact with masters and beings like that, and Babaji came to me and he said, you know, it's time to lovingly and joyously prepare. You know, so it's a different way of looking at things. Enlightenment means to be in knowledge of, you know, the past, the present, and the future, all in the eternal now, and also it means to be aware of the dark side as well as the light side, you know, right. To be in knowledge of all of it. So it's very important that we find a balanced approach to this and not, you know, I know a lot of people are afraid of talking about changes and earth changes and the dark side of things, and they call it fear porn. Mm-hmm. Well, the real fear is being afraid to look at it and see it for what it is, and call upon the Lord God within you to deal with this energy and clean this energy up.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I want to talk about your NDE if you want to go there, but before we do, I want to clear up some terminology for people that may or may not understand what an archon is. John Lash uses the term. Jay Widener uses the term. I believe it stems from Gnosticism, and there are people that are trying to understand what is an archon. Is an archon an Orion? Is an archon a reptilian? Is an archon a gray? Is an archon a Syrian? In the playbook, in the Grand Galactic Playbook, help us define what an archon is and how it differentiates from some of the other extraterrestrial influences, if it does, in our lives.
Okay, that's a really good question, because it goes way back to the Nag Hammadi and back to Egyptian times. We're fully aware of this, and there's actually paintings of the different levels, and it shows these archons in the lower levels. And what they are is they're a collective energy of, depends on your terminology, some would call it demonic, some would call it regenerate grays, regenerate reptilian energies, or some serpent energies are involved in it. But or some very lower astral beings are involved in it, some very messed up people that crossed over that are very self-centered, self-entitled, very negative. You know, they didn't go anywhere, so they're stuck in this frequency or this vibration, whatever you want to call it. But it's there, it does exist. I've actually have photographs of it manifesting and coming out of people when we're doing clearings. But it's a very nasty network. It doesn't have any respect for humanity or the earth. And as a matter of fact, it wants to create as much pain and suffering as sorrow because it feeds on that, and it holds the frequency down so they can continue to exist, because they can't exist in a high frequency environment. And so the more we awaken, the more we heal, the more we focus on love and joy and bliss, and the more we empower people, you know, rather than overpowering people, the more we align with universal principles that are necessary for a healthy society and environment, the less grip they have on us. And that's what we need to do individually and as a collective right now. And there's no way around this, because resistance is futile right now. The whole multiverse right now is pressing in on the earth, and this old program, this old network is going down, and their experience on earth is short-lived, and this is all in the process of being cleaned up as we speak.
Mm-hmm. So I think the key word here is network when it comes to defining what the archons are, that they aren't necessarily a particular race or star group, but they are an amalgamation of consciousness. Is that right?
Yes, and you know, we've bought into this network because the way to explain it is that this network, everything is exterior. You know, people that are really seeking fame and wealth and whatever, you know, chasing the carrot, you know, the American dream, which is, I like what, I can't remember his name, one of the comedians, George Carlin said, you know, he said the reason they call it the American dream is because you have to be asleep to believe in it, you know.
Right, exactly.
But it's pretty funny. But what happens is, as you're moving up this ladder of success within this network, you have to tell a few lies. You know, you have to do a few deeds here and there. And as you move up the ladder, you have to tell a few more lies, a few more deeds, and you can use the political arena as that. People started out good and they tried to make a change, and the next thing you know it, in order to stay in office, they needed the money to get reelected, and so they sold out to this corporation and told a few lies, and it just goes on. And as you climb up this ladder in every institution, in the corporate world, the religious world, the political world, it doesn't matter. It gets darker and darker as you get up to the top. And that's the Archon network. And people are saying, well, I have to feed my family, or I have to buy these things and to keep my wife, or I have to do this, or there's a million reasons why people continue in this network. But the problem is every time you do one of these acts, you separate your soul and spirit from your ego, which the Archon network is running. And the divide gets longer and longer and wider and wider. Pretty soon you have no connection to soul and spirit, and you're just pretty much a puppet.
Right, yeah, corrupt puppet. It seems like they're organizing and strategizing to get underground here. They've got a lot of intensity and activity in and around the Denver airport and other parts around the world. They think that they can somehow go back underground and reemerge at some point in time like they did a long time ago. What's your take on this, and are they going to be successful in their attempt to kind of dodge whatever it is the rest of us are going to experience and meet face on?
Well, the main thing is that the whole planet is going through this shift, down to the atom itself. There's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
You can't run from yourself or your karma. And I always say, who wants to go down into a hole with a bunch of wretched entities, a bunch of control freaks in a hole together, all fighting for survival and me first, and with these huge control and manipulation programs going. When the energy kicks up and you're in a hole with these people, I mean, it's pretty obvious the outcome. It's going to be a mess.
It's hell. That's the outcome. It's hell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have a hellhole that you thought was your survival and you thought was going to keep you safe, but it's not. It's the same thing as security. People think if they align with this network and that they're going to have security. Well, that's the greatest insecurity, because the network is collapsing and their karma is going to come home, and it's all being accelerated and amplified. So all of these little indiscretions and these little, lies and choices and actions, all of that stuff is being amplified on a huge level, and there's no way of getting away from it. So the only real security is to align with soul and spirit and forgive yourself and forgive others, and get with the program and seek out whatever process-oriented therapy you can find. Clear up your old wounds and traumas and wrong conclusions from past experiences, and make your own personal, God, creator, spirit connection, whatever you want to call it, because that's really the only way out during this process.
Yeah, the only way out and through. Let's go back in time, and let's see if we can get a handle on who you were prior to your first NDE. What were your interests? What were your predilections? Your beliefs? And how did that change for you?
Well, the first one, I was only 5 years old, so there wasn't a lot of programming.
Okay.
But I had bronchial pneumonia and was in between worlds. I almost died several times, and they called my parents in and said, we don't think he's going to make it through the night. And I had a woman dressed in blue appear to me, and she would stroke my head and talk to me. And then the final visit, she gave me a substance to eat, and it was a white, looked like ice cream, but it wasn't cold substance. And I ate it, and then I was never sick after that. I pulled right out of it. But I found out later on, it turned out to be Mary, and Mother Mary. And I'm not Catholic. I'm not a religious person. I'm a very spiritual person, and she's not Catholic either, but she'll come to anybody. But that was my first experience. And then the second experience, I totally got caught up in social programming, and I was doing commercial real estate. I was board of director on the Chamber of Commerce. I had the fast car, the big house, everything that I thought measured success, according to the programming. And then I had a drowning experience where I was out body surfing, and these sneaker waves came in that were 25 to 27 foot tall waves, and just trashed me and held me under forever. And I went through the tunnel that everybody talks about, that's the tunnel of light.
Right.
And that was amazing because I went through many, many levels. I ended up in this golden white light where you're unique yet one. You're a light being, but there's a greater consciousness and energy surrounding you. And I had a conversation with this light. And first thing I asked was, how can I stay? Because you're so blissed out. You're in such an incredible space there. You just want to stay. And there's an intelligence there, a divine intelligence that spoke back to me, and it said, I never told one of my children when to come or go. That's free will, And so I go, wait a second, that's not what I heard, from my previous programming. And so the second thing I asked was, how can I earn the right to stay? And this voice, this intelligence communication came back to me, and it said, you can't earn what is given freely and unconditionally. And I'm going, wait a second, this isn't the little old man with a beard with a lightning bolt, and a laptop taking notes. This is something entirely different. There is no wrath in this being. It's just pure love and joy and bliss, and so the next thing I asked was, how can I serve? Because you just want to give something back. You're in such gratitude in being in that light and feeling that energy. And nothing came to me for a while. I was just floating in this bliss, and finally it came back to me and said, what do you want to do? What brings you joy? And I told him I'd like to come back and teach people about the true nature of God and dispel these old, wrathful, separative images, that people are running, and all the divisions and things. And the last words I heard were, as you wish, and I was back in my body, and they were pulling me out of the water.
Well, it's kind of mind-blowing because it sounds to me like not only were you in bliss, but based on kind of where you were in your life and your programming, you were asking some really sophisticated and enlightened questions during that time. I mean, it's a completely immersive experience. What were your thoughts about like who you were during that experience versus who you were before that? It's very different pictures.
Oh, it was, because there's a burn that happens, and a lot of the old programs burned off when you have this experience. And when I came back, I couldn't function in the old world because I was super sensitive. I knew what people are thinking and heard what they were saying. I knew what they were feeling and watching them act, and all four were not congruent. And it was driving me totally insane, because people do say one thing, think something, and do something totally different. And I was seeing entities, and I was seeing entities attached to people, and just all kinds of things, and battling some unseen energies, negative influences that don't like people that can see them,
Sure.
And no tools, no tools or anything. So I was on a crash course to learn the tools, and I studied for about 30 years with lamas and yogis and masters from all over the world to get a good foundation to understand what happened to me and understand how to deal with it, and the tools and techniques to clean these, clear these energies and help people in their own awakening process and transfer the energy that was transferred to me.
Mm-hmm. So how long was it before you started eceti? I'm assuming it's kind of a sanctuary where you could go deeper with this kind of work.
Yeah, I started eceti about a little over 25, I think it was about 26 years ago now. And I was teaching classes in Santa Cruz, California for a while, and I kept having visions, dreams of a place where there was a huge mountain in front of us and a river and a little mountain behind us. And I kept seeing the words little mountain in the vision. It didn't make sense to me at all until I found this place. I was totally guided to it through tools of divination to find it. And when I got here, the vision was exactly correct. It had the huge mountain, the river on the eastern border, and beautiful 70-acre ranch. And what was funny is it didn't make sense. The little mountain made no sense to me, but there was a little tiny mountain behind me, and the place was on Little Mountain Road, which was, and so that's why I saw the letters Little Mountain. It was like I was actually looking at the sign, the street sign.
Mm-hmm. So what led you to this place? I mean, physically, did you see it on Craigslist or a newspaper? Or what was that discovery like for you?
Well, what I did, I took a map of the United States, and I used a pendulum, and I got over the area where it was, and my hand got really hot, and it started spinning crazy, so I marked it. And then what's weird is I threw the map away. I just threw it in my closet and forgot about it. And some opportunities opened up, and my brother was opening up an import shop in Hood River, Oregon, right across the river from Mount Adams, where I am now. And my inner guidance said, do it, you need to go. And so I did. I came up here, and I kept looking up at the mountain. And I said, that's it. That's where I'm supposed to be. And I kept coming up here, and I couldn't find anything. And I had a realtor showing me things, and they were taking me all over the place to the wrong places. And then I drove by this sign, and I got a real strong hit. I need to call this guy. And I felt, and I had a struggle between should I stay with this other realtor or call this sign? And so I called this sign, the guy on the sign. The guy goes, and I told him what I was looking for. He goes, I know exactly what you're looking for. And he said, it's not even up for sale right now. He said, there's a divorce, and it's going to be up for sale. It's like a pocket listing, and if you make them an offer, they'll take it. And so he took me here, and I saw it, and I went, oh my God, this is. I'm looking at the mountain. It looked like something in the Old Testament movie, where it started out with this giant saucer cloud over it. It was pink and orange in the middle. Right. Underneath it, all lit up, and then it folded together and came out in all these fingers going up in purples, and it put on quite a show. And there was two bald eagles circling right over my head, and I had chills and chills going down my spine when I was standing here, and I said, this is it. I had no doubt that this was the place. And so I put an offer in on it, and they accepted it, and that's how it got started.
Well, that got your attention, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. Sure did,
Yeah. So let's talk about eceti and kind of where it is now. Obviously, it's a place where people go to experience phenomena. I mean, you have regular sightings of UFOs and orbs and all kinds of really far out phenomena in the sky. I mean, that's kind of ongoing. Can you talk a little bit about that and what somebody might experience if they decided to contact you and spend some time up there?
Yeah, eceti is it's a vortex. It's a power spot, you might say. It's a very sacred place where the veils between worlds are very thin. And we've done a lot of work here, a lot of deep meditation work, group meditation work, process-oriented therapies, and constantly are cleaning up the unseen negative influences and holding the light, holding the frequency here. So it's a very high-frequency place. But it's not a place where you can't pigeonhole this place because there's so many things happening. Because we have the nature spirits come out, and we work with the nature spirits in our gardening and in the land, and making sure we don't step on their toes in anything that we do. And so, people are getting incredible photographs and actually visually seeing some of the nature spirits that people think are mythological, but they're just outside of our frequency. They're still around in places that have maintained, the environment and the consciousness. And then other people are seeing masters. We're actually photographing masters we have a beautiful photograph of Mary and of Kuan Yin appearing here, another being called Ezekiel, which is an ascended version of Ezekiel that appears here, that a Japanese monk took these photographs. We have ultra-dimensionals appearing here on a regular basis, incredible footage of giant light ships flying right over the ranch and powering up, and sometimes with over 200 witnesses, on the ground, filming and observing these. And this includes, triple PhD Boeing engineers and Lockheed engineers, Skunk Works people, people that really know what we have, and they know these are not anything we've back engineered. So, the pilots, the air traffic controllers, and all the people we've had testify here, as well as Paranormal State came out and filmed the ships coming in exactly when and where we said they would. Danny Dyer, the BBC special, came out here, same thing happened. We've had Fox News, Hannity actually sent a crew out here, and the ships did appear, and I don't think they were going to do a real good story for us, but when the ships appeared, they couldn't deny it, and so they ended up doing a more positive spin. But we've had ABC and CBS and History Channel, and all of these people have come out here and had some major events. The sad thing about, because of the ongoing experience here, and because it is multidimensional, a lot of the UFO community and the organizations out there have totally blackballed the ranch, because they either want it nuts and bolts, or they want it dark, or they want it in the past. They don't want to realize the spiritual component to this and the multidimensional component. And there's just a lot of jealousy and bickering within the communities, and also too, there's a lot of connections with the Archon network, or a lot of disinformation and planned opposition running the program within those organizations. But that's going to be cleaned up and exposed. We're in that process right now, so it's going to get really interesting as these people are exposed for really who they are and what they're doing.
I was really surprised at the positive portrayal by Fox. I mean, it was Sean Hannity's he's a noted hitman, and that report was actually pretty fair and balanced, to be to coin a phrase from Fox. I mean, they brought Bernard Hayshon at the end, who tried to summarily dismiss everything as being a satellite, and then you came back and you actually have satellite tracking software, which allows you to see what's in the sky at any given time. And you looked up the coordinates for that night, and you were able to prove that there was absolutely nothing in the sky that remotely resembled a satellite. So you refuted Haysh's claims right there on air. And I actually think it was interesting that Fox allowed you to do that. They kept that in the show. They didn't edit it out. So I urge people to go to the eceti website and watch this Fox News report. It's pretty enlightening.
Yeah, I was surprised too the way it turned out. But when they came here, they might have had a little different agenda. But when you leave here, you're changed and you're altered, and the producers and the cameraman and all the other people that were here had a total mind-altering experience. And it's very hard to do anything negative after, your soul just screams at you, because they came and they saw the ships, and like when Danny Dyer was here, he came. Well, he's from a whole different world than we're in, because he's kind of in the fast-paced, the limelight, the camera, the external world. Well, he came here and he went through some of our classes and workshops, and went through a Yigong workshop where he just got slammed with the energy. And he shows him walking out of the building. He says, I feel pissed, which means drunk in England,
Right.
But he was hit with the energy so hard and had to adjust to the occasion and rise in frequency so he could have these experiences. By the end of his trip, he was just all blissed out and blown away. And he said in his own words, he goes, I'm on UFO overload right now. I've seen so many ships and had so many experiences. And he traveled all over the world trying to see a ship and didn't see anything or have any experience. But when he came here, he was just blown wide open.
Interesting. I want to shift the conversation just a little bit, and I want to talk about Stephen Greer. He's a controversial figure both inside and outside the UFO world and the disclosure world. There are people that think that Stephen has an agenda and he's not trustworthy, and then there are people that champion his cause and trying to get this before lawmakers in Capitol Hill and get people aware of the relationship between the UFOs and the aliens and the government and all that stuff. What is your opinion on Stephen and the work that he's doing?
Well, that's a real controversial one. I don't like to bash anybody. I can say we have a totally different approach to things because, when you keep giving your power away to an external authority to tell you it's okay to have an experience or believe in something, that's an endless, trap. You never get out of it. And when you pigeonhole and steer this thing to one person or one group, again, the focus is all externally on one person and one group, and it's not an internal experience. It's not your own awakening and healing. It's not empowering you as an individual. It's, again, in a way you're giving your power to external people and places and things or whatever. And so we do something totally different here. Here people have their own experiences. They're very empowered when they leave here. We don't have any Messiah worship going on here. We're totally against that. There's no guru program here. And I always tell people, if you follow me, you're lost because you have your own unique purpose for being here. And you need to find out what that is and get on with it. And I'm human, and I have my experiences and my lessons, and I'm not your guru. Your guru is within. So, I always do a disclaimer right off the bat and get people to bend inward and start going internal. And, the bottom line, what we're seeking is ourselves. I mean, we are the ETs we've been waiting for, and we've all incarnated from these higher planes. The Earth was colonized a long time ago. It's in our genes. And a lot of us, our souls, have just come in from these higher dimensional realities and very spiritually and technologically advanced civilizations. And so they're being activated right now. And people are waking up and remembering, and the higher dimensional beings are activating people, to help in this transitionary process. So it's so important that we empower the individual, and it's all about personal responsibility and being very clear about our choices and actions and the reactions to those choices and actions, and again, living according to universal law, which is real simple. Everybody goes, what's universal law? And it's basically, universal peace, brother, sisterly love, individual freedom and prosperity for everyone, equality. It's just coming from the heart and coming from love and service. I mean, that's what it is. And it is in the heart of hearts of all of us. We just need to back up and get into alignment with that program and get out of this Archon network program that so many are running right now.
Yeah. At one point in time, you seem to be under some kind of duress from black helicopters, MIBs, these enforcers of the Archonic network. And then that stopped, apparently. What was that like, to be under that kind of duress? And what shifted for you and eceti so that now that you could pretty much do your work in an unfettered fashion?
Well, it hasn't really stopped. I've just gotten better tools.
Okay.
And it's forced me to evolve and organize things differently and take a different approach. But we had to go through a total reorganization, of eceti. We had to kind of filter out some aspects and energies that needed to move on, and we had to change the whole system here. And we became a member of Divine Province. We had to patent the land and really remove a lot of the jurisdiction that was being used by the Archon network to come after us. And so on every level, we've worked on that. And also, too, I've gained access to some of these higher dimensional beings, and some of them are like the protectors of the gods. And they call them the felines or the lion beings. And some of these seventh dimensional lion beings that are replete throughout history, if we go back and look at it, throughout Egypt, they called them Sekhmet. In India, they called them Nashringa, Narissa, and I think it's Mahat. They had different names for them. And these beings are actually coming in now to assist people even on the ground to deal with some of these energies. And some of these energies I couldn't get on top of before. They were just too strong and too clever for me. They're very clever, and they know how to find every little button within you and work you through others and people closest to you and things like that. So I finally got on top of this, and I learned healing modalities and technologies where I could actually get rid of these beings once and for all. And now that's starting to happen on a global scale. So the burden is greatly lifted right now, and people are having, a much better chance at breaking these shackles, and the enslavement and the enslaved through dependency program that's been going on.
It's interesting. Stuart Wilde, who just recently passed, one of the things that he left us with was a vision that he had just days before he passed on. And one of the things he talks about in that vision is a meeting with a being that he called the Lion of Judah. And it was really it's fascinating to hear you talk about this feline consciousness or these lion-like beings, especially as it relates to what Stuart saw just before he left his body.
Exactly, and they're coming in right now, and we need to welcome them and call on them. And I know a lot of Christian-based people, they have a great fear of anything outside of their belief system. But it's time to expand that belief system and realize that, God is much greater than their images of what it is. And it's far beyond that. And it's multidimensional, and there's many, many kingdoms, of God out there, and many servants of the source. And we need to really develop our own inner sensitivity so we can tell who's who in the universe. And there's no saying by their fruits you'll know them. If they're protecting, if they're healing, if they're awakening, if they're empowering you as an individual, then hang out with them. If they're dividing, if they're playing on your ego, if they're creating a lot of drama and chaos and doing all these separation games, then it's time to call on the other ones and do a clearing, and clear these beings out of your space.
Yeah, I totally agree. A couple of weeks ago, I had Philip Proffer on my show, and Philip is involved with Langenberg water. And,
yes.
And he told me that you have a pretty close relationship with Max Langenberg. And he told me a story that Max had shared with him about a car ride that you and Max took together from Southern California that apparently took only 6 hours or something like that there was some weird phenomena involved in this car ride. You want to elaborate on that or share any details about what happened there?
Yeah, I've had several of those experiences where there was a whole truck full of equipment, of really sensitive equipment for making this super oxygenated water where we crystallize oxygen and put it in a microhydrant. And has incredible healing potentials and to it. Even cancer is anaerobic. It hates oxygen. So if you raise the body pH and raise the oxygen levels, that backs out your system. But this water also breaks up any kind of pollution in your body too. It breaks it down back to its crystalline form, which is amazing. But in that trip, what happened was we took off from LA and I was sitting there going, oh, my back's kind of sore. It's same story. I'm going, boy, I wish we could shorten this trip somehow. And I was just kind of meditating on it, and I was in a meditative state. And next thing I know, I feel a little spacey, and I open up my eyes, and we're in Eugene, Oregon, in 6 hours, which is impossible. I mean, this truck has a governor on it. It goes 55, and uphill it can't even do that with stuff in it. And so, that's an impossible. So we had a huge bilocation experience, even with the whole truck and everything else. And we both looked at each other, and I go, you know what just happened? He goes, yeah, I know. And I said, did we do that, or did the ETs do that? And he was smiling, so, I'm not exactly sure the origin of it. And we are multidimensional beings, and our higher dimensional selves might have just stepped in and done something. They are the ETs. So it's a long story to really understand how these things happen, but I've had it happen to me on 3 different occasions where I had a very long trip, and the next thing you know, the trip was shortened in half or even less. An hour and a half trip took 15 minutes one time, and I'm not exactly sure how it happened. I know I have friends in high places and with ships that could do that in a moment, and I'm not sure if it wasn't some aspect of my higher self doing that. But I can't deny the experience, and we have multiple witnesses on both ends of the trip, to verify it. So it's amazing. I think there's no end to the human potential once we get past our body and our personality self and get into the alignment with soul and spirit and our multidimensional selves. I think anything is possible.
It seems to me like there is a pretty vital process of refinement that takes place. So, for instance, the more that the ego is refined and has less of a demanding role in how things should be, the more that we're open to this kind of phenomena and can co-create with it. If the ego gets in the way, then it becomes really a manipulative or dark exercise in operating this phenomenon. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we run into that all the time. There's a lot of dark sorcery out there and a lot of manipulation and control programs. And unfortunately, these people don't even know they themselves are being manipulated. And they didn't have the discernment or the training to realize, you know, there's an old African saying, it doesn't matter where you fall, go back to where you slipped, you know, and then you'll understand what happened. But if we have wounds and traumas and problems in our past that we haven't dealt with, and we're in great need of acceptance and approval outside of ourselves, and we're seeking fame and notoriety and wealth, you know, we're going to take the right-hand path. And you will have beings that will jump in and help you with that right-hand path. And the left-hand path is more service to others. It's more, you know, just focusing on love and joy and bliss and healing and service to others, and making yourself less important. Mm-hmm. And so many people have taken the right-hand path and don't even know who's helping them, and how much they've actually separated themselves from the source, you know, or from their soul and spirit, by aligning with these other energies, and that's all coming up to the surface right now and being exposed. So it's all a matter of choice and action, and again, universal law, and aligning with love and joy and bliss and service, and that will, if you use that as a foundation, you'll be fine. But you know, it's like these dark arts that we were just talking about earlier, you know, with the black ops and the black helicopters. They have their master sorcerers. They're working with gray and reptilian energy. They're masters at manipulating people. They're very good, and they'll put thoughts and feelings and emotions in you that aren't even yours, and you don't even know who's running your ship anymore. Right. But you know, they're very good at it because they are part of the network, and they have an intention, you know, which is askew from enlightenment. You know, and that whole thing is not sustainable where the Earth is going. Her frequencies are moving up. She's choosing a whole new process, a whole new ascension, a whole new evolution. And the problem with those frequencies is that they're not frequencies specific to the Earth anymore. So all of that stuff is going to fall apart, be exposed, and the people who are using those energies to manipulate others are going to lose control, which is going to be a whiplash effect to them, or you know, it's almost like taking a slingshot and pulling it way back and back and back, and then finally you're going to let it go, but it's aiming at your face, you know, when it goes off.
Right. Project Bluebeam, how real is it? How real is the possibility that it can be turned on at some point in time to distract people and get them entrained into a different reality and perhaps even a different timeline?
Oh, it's totally real. I mean, we've already used it. We used it in some of the war fronts over there in Iraq and things of that nature. And we used other weapons, too, to just totally disorient people, you know, and ELF technologies and things. I mean, there were soldiers there putting shoe polish on bread that didn't even know their names, you know. They were so disoriented by these energies. And we've had that technology for a long time, and, you know, it's coming through all kinds of ways. I mean, microwave technology, you know, they have these, I think they're called Gwyn towers, the microwave towers, the satellites. They have technologies beyond our imagination that are 100 years beyond what's being shown to the public, basically. So they can do all kinds of things, and Nick Bajik has a lot of information on this, where they can actually transfer thoughts through a computer into somebody's head, and they wouldn't even know they weren't their thoughts. And they can do the same thing. You know, emotions have frequencies, and so they can take the frequencies of love and joy and bliss and technologically aim them at somebody to make them actually feel that they're in love and they're so happy to meet this person. This person's the greatest thing since toast, you know? Right. But the bottom line, and then all of a sudden they'll see that, wow, this person is doing the exact opposite of what they're saying, and then they have the big wake-up call when they start looking at the choices and the actions that these people are making. So it's very tricky. It all goes back to inner sensitivity and self-mastery and learning how to recognize, you know, what's in your fields, where your hooks are, how you can be manipulated, and whether things are truly coming from within or are they an external, input coming in, through someone else.
Yeah, I experienced this phenomenon when I used to watch Bush on TV, and for whatever reason, I felt happy when I saw him, and I knew intellectually that he was, that he was running a pretty dark program, whichever one of him was running it at the time. I mean, intellectually, I could say this guy is corrupt, the neocons are corrupt, everything about this is just absolutely dark. And yet, when I watched him on TV, I felt happy. And then I realized that there was some other signal, some other frequency that was being pumped through that experience while I was watching him. So I had to stop actually watching any of the press conferences or the Rose Garden Q&As, and it was creepy. So I mean, this is my experience. This stuff does exist.
Oh, it definitely exists, and they're still using it. So, it's kind of funny because there's this total disconnect, and it goes back to choices and actions, and not so much what they say, but what they do. And if you just put aside what they're saying and look at what they're doing, you'll see very clearly that they all have the same agenda. They all work for the same group, and they're all going in the same direction. And it's very clear what that direction is, which is total control, domination, and to cut the population down to a very, very low manageable group, So, and you'll see that in all of their programs eventually. When you look, they sound good on the exterior. When you start going into them deeper, you go, wow, this is just another attempt to exploit more money out of the people, enslave them through dependency, put a heavier burden on them, disempower them, and a lot of it is actually killing them in the long run, through a slow poison, you might say. But it's obvious. I hate to get into the dark side, but when you look at the fluoride in the water, the over 600 toxins in the water, some have 850 toxins in there that are carcinogenic. You look at the aspartame that's coming in. Now they're trying to put aspartame in milk, and put that everywhere. Yeah. I can go on and on with all the food additives and everything else, and now with the genetically modified food, the fracking, I can just go on forever with this as to what's happening. There's an all-out war on health and the environment right now. And so if we really do have agencies and we are governed by the light and people are truly loving, joyous, caring people that are in charge of this planet right now, these things would not be in the mess they are, and they wouldn't allow any of these things to happen. So we have to back up and do a reality check and say, wait a second, turn our TVs off for a little while, get out in nature, start eating close to nature, close to the land, get away from all the processed food, get some really good, clean drinking water, and clean up our systems. And then we can start seeing the matrix and how much we're involved in it. But until that happens, we're just good little zombie consumer robots governed through fear and insecurity, by the media, and we're just going to, like lemmings, take ourselves off the cliff without even a critical thought.
Yeah, this is absolutely on the money. We seem to be in a pretty big cosmic churn right now, and there's a lot happening. Do you have any? We talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the show, but do you have any timeline predictions, or is there anything that's being shared with you right now that you want to pass on to people?
Well, basically right now, they're telling me it's on. I mean, this awakening and healing process, the switch is fully flipped, and we are in the alignment we're moving into a highly charged place in space, with all of these alignments, and we're getting bombarded by this energy constantly, which is really pushing evolution, forcing us to grow and heal. And there's no way out of it right now, and we're in the midst of it, and it's really kicking on hard right now, and it's going to be going at least till July, and then tapering off, I think, around 2016. But we're in the peak of this energy right now, and it's going to exponentially grow. So what they're telling me is that just be awake, get in touch with nature and the land where you are, time to lovingly and joyously prepare and pay attention, and it's time to step away from the matrix and get out of it. Because if you are aligned with the beast, you're going to go down with the beast when it goes, and it will. It is going down. This archon network is being totally dismantled.
If people want to have an experience at eceti and accelerate their process of healing and awakening, are you still offering classes and immersion up there?
Yeah, we do transpersonal release sessions where we clear past life and birth trauma and then anything, childhood trauma, and then connect people in with their star families or their source, wherever they can get to, concerning their evolution. We do a lot of work on that nature, and it's a quantum leap in